So I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. Um, Welcome to another Zoom. I'm probably tired of all the Zooms that we have these days. And we get a Zoom about in DoD regulation. So I'm going to do my best to try and make this as exciting as I can. But I'm starting in kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It's an uphill climb here. But anyway, my goal is to try and make this as clear as possible, and you kind of learn what's going on here from the DoD's perspective. And so I'll get started. First of all, you got to love this interim final rule. So what exactly does that mean? It means they put the rule out because it kind of outside the normal process of allowing public comment and a number of things like that. In this case, what they did was they released the rule with 60 days to comment on it, and then the rule immediately went into effect. It also means that the rule eventually is going to go away, and they're going to have to replace it with a final rule. So I'm going to go ahead and get to the next slide. So CyberNINES is a newer company. We were created in July, and it's a spinoff of Five9s, a company in Madison that is MSP and does hosting and a number of different IT services. We focus on trying to deal with the complexity associated with NIST 800-171 and now CMMC. We are one of the first companies so far to be a registered provider organization. And that just means that we've gone through some training on CMMC and what it means and what the rule is and what companies need to do to get themselves certified. So we're first going to talk about controlled and classified information. And, if you're a small business owner or you're supporting businesses that do manufacturing, really what this is what you know of as ITAR. So ITAR is a form of controlled and classified information. And it's information the government creates or possesses, or that an entity creates or possesses for the government under a contract. And it's what they're trying to do is they're trying to safeguard this information. It is not classified, so it's not confidential, secret, or top secret. It's really what you probably heard of before as for official use only. That was the older term for things like this. But you might hear the word CUI, CUI, but it encompasses all of that. It's owned by the National Archives as a standard. And other types of CUI are EAR, Export Administration Regulation. That's covered by the Commerce Department. ITAR is covered by the State Department. And even within these different types of CUI, there are different types of rules. For example, UCNI, or unclassified controlled nuclear information, can only be US citizens. But ITAR, you really only need to be a permanent resident, so a green card or US citizen. And so there are some differences there. The other type of information that really applies to businesses dealing with government contracts is federal contract information. And it's really not contracting, that's a mistake. It's contract information. So FCI also has to be protected, but it has lesser stringent controls to protect FCI. So we have this new interim rule. So the new interim rule is in effect. It went into effect November 30th. And if you are a defense contractor right now, you're probably aware of the DFARS 250 or 252, 204, 7012. So that's been in effect since December of 2017. And that requires compliance through self-attestation. So basically, you'll get a form from a prime, or if you're a prime, you have to attest that you're meeting DFAR 7012. And DFAR 7012 is based on NIST 800-171. And there are 110 controls in NIST 800-171. And to be in compliant to that DFAR, you have to have two documents. You have to have a system security plan, SSP, and a POAM, plan of actions and milestones. The system security plan dictates how, or it explains how you are trying to meet the DFAR in NIST 800-171, and the POAM explains the gaps, and it talks about when you're going to meet those gaps. So it's sort of like a project plan. Now, the new rule that just got published. So what it says, there were 3 new DFARs as part of that rule. And it just basically boils down to this. The 7019 rule just is a notice saying there's 2 new rules coming out. So it's really kind of doesn't really tell me much. But 7020 adds a new it's basically 7012 plus a new requirement to report a score in the SPRS system, so supplier portal. And then the 7021 DFAR says that really rolls out CMMC, the cybersecurity maturity model. So that's really, at a high level. So, all right, so this interim final rule. So again, to kind of just recap, the rule is not retroactive. So if you have existing contracts, it only applies to new contracts. And there are caveats to that. So the NIST 800-171, so the rule breaks it down into basically the 2 assessment frameworks. You've got the assessment methodology 800-171, which exists today, and you have the CMMC framework. So those are the 2. I'm going to go into a little more detail on what each of those mean next. So the changes to 800-171. So all new contracts and flow downs will have to meet these changes. So if you think, for example, as of December 1st, you have to post a score in this SPRS system, that really isn't true. It really is, what's really happening is a prime is going to get a new contract or award, and that award should have now the 7019 DFAR and the 7020 DFAR. Those 2 then DFARs are going to drive this new standard here. It only applies then when you as a sub, you'll get it flowed down from a prime, those 2 new requirements. And so before we had to just self-attest that we're meeting the requirement, now you actually have to post a score. And that does change the game a bit, because now you're actually putting a score into a government system. And it's really important that score really matches reality. And the reason that I say that is that there's more of a chance that you can get hit with things called the False Claims Act. You put a score in, and then DCMA comes out and does an audit. And if there's anything willful, for example, if they could, if there's an email that says, yeah, I know our score is 40, but I'm going to put in 70. If there's any kind of record of that, you can be subject to false claims, and that can have a big impact on your ability to get awards. So make sure that score is correct. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do that too. The other piece about this new rule is that there are basic, medium, and high assessments. And that really kind of boils down to the risk that the government sees in the contractor dealing with their information, again, CUI. Medium and high assessments are more likely going to get an actual DCMA audit. but the majority of these are going to be basic. So again, you're going to do it yourself, or you're going to hire another firm to help you do it, and then you're going to post your score, and that's going to kind of be the end of it. You can update your score as much as you can too. The last thing I'll say about this is there isn't really guidance yet on what those scores mean, as far as, if you have a lower score versus somebody else, what does that mean exactly from the standpoint of a prime, purchasing manager versus, we just don't know yet. Obviously, it's better to have a higher score. So in order to get information into, or to post your score, there's a system called the supplier, hang on a minute, what is that, man? SPRS. Supplier Performance Risk System. Too many acronyms. They pronounce it SPRS, so you might hear that term. In order to be able to post a score in SPRS, you have to make sure you have a sam.gov account, and I'm sure if you're ITAR registered or anything like that, you're going to have that already. You have to have a DUNS number and a cage code, and you have to have a designated contract administrator. Once you have those in place, you then can create an account in PIEE, Procurement Integrated Enterprise Environment, and from there, you can actually gain access to SPRS. So I've shown a couple of the main screens here for SPRS. One, the create new header, that's where you create a new line and post a score. And then the screen below gives a summary of the fact that you can update your scores as much as possible, or as much as you want, actually. So for example, let's say you assess yourself, you give yourself a score of, let's say, -110. And I know it sounds unusual to have a minus score, and I'll explain that in just a second. But you get yourself put your score in -110, and then you go through, for example, 39 of the NIST controls can be met by policy or procedure. So you go ahead and update your policies and procedures, you train your employees, and now you go back into, you update your POAM that you've completed those items. And now you have 102 more points. So now you're at -8 instead of -110. So that's basically the process you follow. The scoring is a little unusual in that NIST has 110 controls, and every control gets so many points subtracted from it if you are not compliant to that control. So I'll give you an example of multi-factor authentication for login. So and again, this applies to CUI. So as part of your system security plan, you're going to define where CUI resides in your network. And that is what you're defining as your system for the reference to the points that I'm talking about. So let's say you have just, you don't have MFA installed at all. So you would subtract 5 points from 110. So now you're down to 105. Now, the interesting thing there is you can get partial credit if all your remote people are using multi-factor authentication, but your local on LAN people are not, then it's only -3. And so you can see if all of these 110 controls have either a -5, -3, or -1, it's not too hard to get negative pretty quickly in that scoring methodology. So let's talk about CMMC for a minute. So again, this is DFAR 7021. So this CMMC is going to be rolled out over 5 years. And I've actually heard 10 or 15 contracts, but right now I'm hearing it's 15. So there's going to be 15 awards this fiscal year, and only 15 are going to be subject to DFAR 7021. And then the following year, there'll be another 15. So you can see they're going to phase it out over time. There's probably 600 or 700 companies in the whole US that are going to be hit by this DFAR this year. And I think by now those companies should know who they are. So after October 1st, 2025, all new contracts are going to be required to meet the CMMC framework. So the key difference between 7012, which is the requirement today, and also the 7012, actually, and also then the 7019 to 7020, which is still a self-attestment with a score, is that for 7012, you self-attest, and 7021, it's going to require a third-party audit. So my favorite acronym, C3PAO, Certified Third-Party Assessment Organizations. These are the organizations that are going to come out and do audits of the defense industrial base. So everyone will have to get audited. So for level 1, it's, again, we talked about federal contract information, FCI. That's only 17 controls. However, level 3, which is really going to be the majority of people doing work for, the DoD in the manufacturing space, that's going to be level 3. So think level 3 is really NIST 800-171. So those 110 controls plus 20 more from some different frameworks that are added for CMMC. So there's 130 controls for CMMC level 3. See if I missed anything there. No. So, as a small business or medium-sized business trying to manage your risk as to whether or not you need to be CMMC certified right away, well, first of all, the answer is no. There's only 70 provisional assessors, maybe a little more than 70, but around that number right now that can do audits. They haven't started audits yet, and they're starting with level 1. So I would say they're a little behind in this process already. And so realistically, it's going to be 3 to 5, even the 5 years, at least 3 years probably before any of us need to really start being very concerned about needing to be CMMC compliant. But the big goal here is, though, if you're making progress on NIST 800-171, you're already working towards being CMMC ready for that audit. This is the maturity model for CMMC, and you can see level 1 having 17. And the other thing is, where I was talking about it as controls, that's the language of NIST. The language of CMMC is practices, so they call them practices. Level 1, again, federal contract information. There's 17 practices to be compliant to that. Level 2 is an intermediate level that they're trying to just give people some credit for making progress towards level 3, but there aren't going to be contracts written against level 2 that I'm aware of. Level 3 is, again, going to be the majority of the contracts. For things, if you think ITAR, EAR, 600 series, that's where that's going to fit. That's where you get the 130 practices. And right now, the level 4, level 5, I haven't heard a really good definition of who's going to fall into those categories yet. Probably a few of the primes, for example, would fall into that. The Lockheed Martin's working on Joint Strike Fighter, but I'm just speculating on that. So that's the presentation. I tried to do that quick and dirty, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to take questions at this point.
Hey, Scott, this is Todd.
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
One of the things I wanted to maybe ask to help fuel any discussion is what we see when we're working with clients on this is that, usually they've got a pretty big negative score, right? And there's quite a ways to go to get to that, to get all of this stuff in place. So 3 years, 3 years down the line, it's kind of a good time frame to work starting now, right?
Yep.
To get things in order, right?
Yep, that is true. And again, making that progress against your plan of actions and milestones is really making the progress you need to make towards CMMC level 3. So there's a couple of questions here. One is, can we get a copy of the slides? Yeah, I'll post the slides on our website. And then the other question is, can you talk about how a company can certify part of their business? Yeah, so I kind of talked about that, at least I alluded to that earlier, is that in your system security plan, you're going to define where your CUI data is located. And I highly recommend, or what I've been telling our clients, is that you should develop or build a CUI enclave. And so the enclave is, what you want to do is, as much as possible, limit the amount of footprint that CUI is located out on your network. Okay. So that's kind of a key aspect in trying to, limit the cost of being compliant, because trying to do this for your whole network can get expensive, especially if you have multiple networks, subnets. You have to protect all of those at the same level. Again, the main premise here is you're protecting CUI, and you need to protect CUI by encrypting the data at motion and at rest. And so, if you have 100 computers, that means if you're going to do your whole network, that means 100 computers have to meet all the requirements, BitLocker turned on, all the group policies set up, and Active Directory to have screens shut off after 30 minutes. You can go on and on about that. But again, limit that footprint of your CUI enclave to be as small as you can. One example of that, I'll just talk quickly about that. One example about that could be, for example, let's say you're just building, you're a build to print shop, and you quote from a prime to build some part that they want you to build. So you go out, you grab that, drawing from that they said that they have on their secure portal. Let's say it's ExoStar or something else. You pull that drawing, you put it in your government cloud location that only, let's say, 2 or 3 people have access to. And that then becomes your enclave becomes the 2 or 3 computers that are going to the cloud. The government cloud is, a FedRAMP moderate, compliant cloud. And then you have a plotter, okay? And the plotter then is in your cloud too. And remember, the plotter has a hard drive, so that needs to be encrypted too. But that's it for your CUI enclave. Now when you're ready to build the part, you print it out, the drawing out in your plotter, and you take it out to the shop floor and you tell your guys to go build this, right? Now you treat that piece of paper that you printed out as CUI, and you now have to physically protect the piece of paper. You lock it up at night, you have an access control policy, visitors are escorted. So that's, in my view, the cheapest, easiest way to do that. So that's what we talk about as far as, when we talk about a turnkey solution, we have different tools that we've found to meet that requirement. And we help our clients build that enclave for them. Let's see if there's anything else. So I talked about certifying part of the business. Talked about slides.
Somebody wanted to know a little bit more. Joshua wanted to know a little bit more about the turnkey solution. And I think, that there's a lot of different facets to that, Scott, where we've got procedures, we've got templates of procedures we help clients with. And then we've got our managed compliance service that well, we start with a regular CVA and a scan and a POAM and get them all set up. But then there's just a continuing process of monitoring and managing that, helping our clients manage that, right?
Yeah, again, it's a journey to get to compliance, and it's easy to, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's fairly easy to get a system security plan and a POAM put in place. It's not easy to mitigate or remediate all the items in the POAM. That's where the rubber meets the road here, and it becomes a little difficult. And the minute you start not updating the POAM, that actually gets you out of compliance. So you have to be regularly making progress and updating that document to be in compliance. And that's what we help clients with. Any other, I guess that's the end of the questions.
There is one question from David. He's asking, what is the better or easier path for storing CUI? Dedicated internal systems or storage or government cloud?
I'm a believer, well, I started believing it was better to be on-prem and to have that your server, in-house and protect it that way. Over time, I've come to the realization that it's much easier to use the government cloud. There are two, main gov clouds out there. There's an Azure gov cloud and there's an AWS gov cloud. And those are compliant to meet even storing ITAR in those clouds. They have to meet FedRAMP moderate requirements to do that. Microsoft has what's called GCC High. That's their gov cloud solution to store ITAR and EAR 600. And then there are some tools that are built that use those clouds, and those are the tools that I would recommend. Things like, Box has a gov cloud. Prevail is a solution that we like that has a gov cloud solution, and the reason there's one of the DFAR has a requirement that you have to be able to go back 90 days. To be able to look at logs and find out what had happened if there was some type of a breach or anything. And 90 days is pretty difficult. And having that service from AWS or Azure to be able to be that backstop, because they are saving that data in those environments for you. And they can hire lots of smart people. It's pretty tough to hire a lot of people these days. And they're maintaining that environment. Whereas it's hard for organizations to meet that same level of compliance. So a little bit of a long answer to that, but that's why I really am pushing the Gov Cloud environments.
Thank you, Scott. We have 1 minute left, and we are asking you to participate in our polling. So there will be a polling pops up on your screen. Please help us to improve our webinar, and thank you again.
Oh, it says I can't vote.
And also the recording of this webinar will be sent to you by email. And also you can find it on our library page at www.cybernines.com.
And I will post the slides up there too.
Thanks for joining, everybody.
Yep, thank you. Have a great day. See ya.
Have a great day.